This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast with Living the Wildlife Podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and/or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Van Tassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi, everyone. Stephen Van Tassel here. Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife Podcast as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. So, hey, we're really glad to have you on board. We hope to take a few moments of your time to make sure you subscribe to our channel, make sure you ring the bell so you're aware of new updates. So here we are in the brand new year of 2022, and we're starting off with an interview with a gentleman who is a really sort of a godfather within the industry because he goes way back. And we may say, well, Stephen, you're not that old. Well, yeah, we're getting up there. But the point is that our industry really began to become formed in the 1980s. And so Phil Nichols, he owned a company, no longer owns it now. He's retired for several years now. He owned PVE Corporation, which was a combination which provided wildlife control services, as well as he was a supplier of traps and wildlife control equipment as well. So he was there back near the foundation days where there was basically a virgin market. And so we're having him on today to talk about some of the old days and also give you some tips and ideas for pitfalls that he came out in terms of his business, as well as things that you might learn from, and just get a little bit of history of our industry because we're starting to get more mature and we need to capture some of this information for posterity. So Phil, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Steve.
Tell us a little about yourself and what got you involved in wildlife control.
Like many people in the early part of the industry, I was a fur trapper.
Okay.
And I grew up in the 1950s and started fur trapping back then when a muskrat bought 75 cents and you could buy a trap for 75 cents. So every muskrat increased my trap inventory by one. And fast forward to life, and I found myself doing outdoor things, but living a, let's say, corporate lifestyle through the 70s. The first opportunity came when a Pennsylvania game warden came to me. He knew me as a fur trapper and asked me if I wanted to get involved in buying a permit so I could trap all year round. And all kinds of bells and whistles went off in my head. And I, of course, you know that voice in your head that says, don't do that or do that? Well, it said, do that. And well, anyway, I did it.
You did it. That was the better angel.
Yes.
That was the better angel. Good. Yes.
I did it. And of course, at that time, I didn't really understand what was going on, other than the Game Commission had come up with this program because they were sick and tired of servicing private people with their personal problems. It'd be like they were, inundated with groundhogs and giving cage traps and keeping up with things, and it just got too much for them. So they came up with this program, and they would funnel all the inquiries they get to the people that held these permits. So that was great. It was free marketing. And some of the early on calls were just ridiculous because the people expected, since they're calling a state agency, to get the service for free.
Right.
And of course, I had to go through great lengths to explain to them that I was a private service. And this phenomena decreased over time as more people got aware of people, I'll call them NUCOs, nuisance wildlife control operators. NUCOs became more visible. They're above the radar at some point, and people know about them and seek them out. I was one of the first things I did when there was no other avenue was be in the Yellow Pages. And that was, that was the thing then.
And when did you start? When did you start moving into this space? When did you get that permit? Do you have an idea? Was that early 80s?
Yeah, it was early 80s.
Early 80s. Okay.
Yeah. And I had a very low number. They assign each permit a number, which is your number forever. I had a pretty low number. So, and I know some of the other people that had gotten the permit, I knew them from fur trapping, but they had never said a word about this to me.
Yes.
Typically fur trappers, they're loners and they're very closed mouthed about everything. And well, anyway, enough of that. It started to pick up, I would say mid 80s. And I was still doing it part-time. The decision to go full-time came about right before I started writing the book, which was '93. And I came to the conclusion that this is what I wanted to, when you come to the realization that you have something that you want to do, that you can be passionate about with your life, it's pretty obvious, and that, there's just no backing out of it. You just go full steam ahead.
Right.
And that's what I did. The money didn't come right away, so I had to, let's say, keep appearances up as far as my financial condition was by part-time jobs, odd jobs, chopping firewood. I was driving truck for 1 day a week. I was a night watchman, things like that. And just doing things for people. I'm fur trapping too.
Yeah. Did you not have the population, or was it an issue of that people were still more in that do-it-yourself mode?
I didn't really pursue it the way I should have until that point.
Yeah, I got you.
And right after that, it just started. It got to the point where I gave up all my side jobs, and I had, at that point, my adult daughter ran the office, and my grandson, who was 18 at the time, he was my first employee.
Wow.
So we were getting leads through the Yellow Pages, and a lot of it was just legwork on my part, going around the police stations and leaving my card saying, here I am, use me.
What animals did you control? Talk about the progression of your business. So you were doing a lot of part-time work, and then you started.
The first animal I controlled was a red squirrel. Okay.
Red squirrel. Okay.
And then it went mostly, the Game Commission got calls for groundhogs and skunks and squirrels. That was the big three coming from them. But there was a whole world of other things that pretty soon became obvious that these were places where you could make a lot of money. I'm talking about bats, snakes, things you wouldn't really think about when you're a fur trapper. And as my grandson got older, he went on his own out to do what he did. And I hired outside employees. The most I ever had was two guys working, both two full-time during the summer, and then part-time from, let's say, late summer till early winter. And the real change came when the internet evolved into people searching for services. And I thought, yeah, this is good. And I tried that, and when I Googled myself, I came up like 286 on the list, you know.
Yeah. You AOL? Were you using AOL at the time?
Don't ask me any technical questions. I will tell you this though. A young man came to me who I had known all my life. He had just graduated Notre Dame with a degree in finance.
Okay.
And computers and finance. Anyway, he said, Phil, can I work for you for 2 years as an apprentice and you don't have to pay me? And then I'll go off and I won't compete with you. I'll just go away. I said, sure. So he was a very fast learner and I could see where he was coming from. One of the first things he did was take my business entity and move it up to #1 on the search engine.
Right.
Okay. And then he created a service, and I was the beta test, where you would be assigned an area. And that area, all the calls that came in through his service would be directed to you.
Right.
And this ultimately went nationwide, but initially it was my part of Pennsylvania. And he tapped into a part of Pennsylvania that was populated by the wealthiest elite upper tier types of people. You know, your New Yorkers that come across the river to New Hope in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, the New Hope Playhouse, all the artsy craftsy types of things,
Yeah.
all up and down the river there, and
Nice.
all the magnificent old homes. And some of the people would take these ancient dairy barns and turn them into amusement centers for their kids, you know, complete with the rolling coasters.
Oh my gosh.
And
Yeah.
of course, they went about this before they took time to really think about it and get rid of the bats and the squirrels and all the things that have been living there for umpteen years.
Yes.
So that was a very, very lucrative, you know, part of our business. We did quite well. And fast forward to, I was 65, still going strong. My wife was 1 year younger than me. She worked at a pharmaceutical, not to be named, and she was hating it. She wanted to retire.
Mm.
She goes, I said, well, this is going good. I mean, can't you just stick it out a little longer? And we were out one day, and she just happened to be with me one day. I think it was a Sunday. Yeah, it was a Sunday. That's why she was with me. And I was doing a ladder job, and I took the ladder, and you know how you bring it down? It goes,
yeah.
Well, it just went boom and slammed into my hand.
Oh.
So I'm there with bones sticking out of my hand, and she's, you know, like that. That was the writing on the wall. The voice on the shoulder said, you might want to think about this, putting ladders up and climbing around, doing this stuff. And the funny part was she took me to the ER, and my daughter worked there at the time. And she thought it was hilarious. She was bringing all her buddies in to see her dad.
Oh my goodness.
Bloody stumps as a hand. So that was the beginning of the end. We decided to retire. I sold the business and we moved to North Carolina, happily, away from the snow.
Away from the snow. So in terms of the progression of your business, so you started with those, I would call them, I don't think squirrels are necessarily a beginner's animal per se, because there's some ladder work often with that. But I normally think about things as, you know, like the progression of a business. I tell people, like, start with the ground animals first, then move to the raccoons and squirrels, and that we can get into buildings, and then I would say bats and coyotes and maybe beaver are taking it to a different level, depending on, you know, those are more specialty animals. And then birds, of course, you have easy birds and you have more difficult birds. Is that kind of how your business moved forward as well? You kind of did a lot of your ground animals and then started getting into some repairs? And
well, I learned a lot from going to the seminars that Rob Erickson was putting on and some other people. strove to leverage a job to its maximum, meaning that if the squirrel's doing bad things to the soffits, can I fix the soffits? You know, can I sell them something on top of getting rid of the squirrels? And it was pretty easy to sell it because nobody wants to go try to find another guy who maybe doesn't understand the problem the way I understood it or the way a Nuco understands it. So, and you can give them a guarantee, say, you know, this will never, oh, I've been having squirrels or raccoons or whatever for years and years. And I said, well, I can give you a guarantee that if you know, sign this contract and you won't have this problem again. And that was a good part of it.
Yeah, so you learned early on the importance of those add-ons and the exclusion. In my conversations with people today, it seems that the animal control side is really just sort of it's not a lost leader, I can't say that, but it's the buy-in to the real money, right? The real money is in the repairs. And so the desire. So that's something, and you learned that, did someone tell you that, or did you just sort of figure that out on your own?
Well, that was, you know, it was a combination, I would say. I learned an awful lot from the people at that time who were doing similar things, and we shared a lot too. Right. And we didn't just talk, we would meet at like trappers conventions, you know, and these same people, you sit around the bonfire and what do you talk about? Well, a lot of ideas came out of that. Right. A lot of methods too. I mean, I learned basically how to install an exclusion barrier to a shed that critters were getting underneath. Yep. And that was a big money maker too. Yeah. And not only the shed, but some very big buildings. We would install barriers to some, you know, enormous buildings. It would take weeks. And the other thing was bats. You know, you can get a lot of money out of a bat job. Again, these wealthy people buying historic homes that had bats in the upper levels forever. Of course, they didn't want them. Right. And you may had to go by a protocol for a historic building. Instead of using a nail, you had to use a wooden peg, you know, that kind of thing. Right, right.
Now, you were still in business during the Mid-Atlantic rabies epidemic, weren't you?
Oh, yeah. That was,
yeah. So how did that impact your business? Because it devastated mine.
What do you mean devastated?
Well, I lost a third of my business.
Oh, I didn't lose any business. I just lost, at the time, the fur trade was in an upcycle, and raccoons were selling for a good, you know, you could take a road-killed raccoon to a local country fur buyer and throw it on the table, and he'd give you $25 for it. You skin that coon and put it upright and send it off to the auction, fur auctions, and you could get up to $60 for it. Yeah. So the raccoon population was exterminated in my area when rabies came through. We didn't have raccoons for 12 years.
Well, that's what happened to me. Raccoons were such a significant part of my business. Yeah. The year of the introduction of rabies, it was gangbusters. I mean, pulling raccoons out of everywhere. And then there was that death shadow, and it was down to maybe a couple of raccoon jobs in the entire year. I
would say it took about 12 years to recover.
Yeah. I think you're about right. I was out of the business by that point.
After that, you would still get rabies calls, but it was spread out. You know, it wasn't like a big, what do you call it, pandemic? The word, what's that word, pandemic?
Or epidemic. Epidemic is just sort of just that spike. So it's just in the background now, and it just kills. Did you have distemper as well? Did distemper come through?
Not distemper was always there, but not to that extent.
Okay. So what were some of the biggest challenges? I mean, what did your wife think when you were deciding to quit all of these side jobs and start going full time? And where was she in all this?
I did that only when the money was there. So that was an easy transition. There was
Okay.
there's always go ahead, do what you want, but
Make sure the money comes
line.
in. So talk about that challenge, because obviously there's that problem of you want to be able to go from one rope to the next rope, but sometimes that's not always perfectly timed.
We built up quite a number of contracts,
Okay.
clientele that were repeat year after year. Some of them were government, some of them were like railroads, golf courses, rich ladies with large estates that trained hunting dogs and raised quail and pheasants. She had 300 acres totally fenced in southern Delaware County, which is where the fox hunting club clientele goes in Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia.
Okay.
It's a ritzy area, and she paid me, 4 figures a year up front just as a retainer.
Nice. So
And
how
then-
did you recruit these contracts? Because I think that's an interest of a lot of our listeners, because that's a big challenge with our work. And it's not like bugs per se, where or someone's going to have, a restaurant's going to struggle with cockroaches, and even if you eliminate them, the likelihood of them coming back is pretty high from whatever. But with wildlife control, I had a lot of jobs. Once I finished, I never saw that client again.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that because if you solve the problem and then fix it permanently, you're not going to hear from them again.
Well, right, yeah.
Unless it's a different creature.
But you were able to get these contracts, so talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the key was being number one on the search engine.
Okay.
Okay, that's I would say probably a good 75% of the clientele came from that, and the others came from word of mouth, reputation, and recommendation. Somebody, especially I was pretty tight with the law enforcement community,
okay,
and they would trust me, give me the keys to the castle, so to speak, and I can.
How did you cultivate that? Was it just? Did you have relatives in the police force? Did you just simply reach out to them?
One of my side gigs, I was a constable, a Pennsylvania state constable for 10 years.
Okay.
And that involves you work with a local court and a judge, and the judge gives you a handful of warrants, and then you have to service the warrants. Well, I'm not on a clock. I can service the warrants on my time frame.
Right.
So I can go to your house and knock at the door at 6 o'clock at night. Say, hi, Steve, I got a warrant here for your arrest. You want to pay for this traffic ticket you didn't pay, or you want to come with me? I have the handcuffs right here. You want to come with me to the courthouse? So wait, get my checkbook out. No, we don't take checks. We totally take cash. I don't have cash. Well, I can take you to one of the cash machines. You want to do? Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So that was pretty cool.
Okay.
And
sounds dangerous.
Well, I was armed.
Okay. All right.
And I was young too. I was young and kind of foolish in a way.
All right.
It was interesting. And I got it down to a system too, where I would cherry pick the warrants and leave the dangerous ones for the other constables, and I would take the ones that I would.
Oh, okay. All right. There we go. So yeah, so you're not your average constable then. Okay.
The judge loved me. We had a good relationship.
Okay.
Her husband was a state cop, so my best friend was a state cop, and he was a fur trapper. And did you ever hear the name Phil Brown, Pennsylvania fox trapper? He's putting out videos now of, I think it's $99 to go along with Phil Brown follow him on his trap line. He would
really? That's a great price.
1,200 red fox a year. Can you imagine that?
Well, I did think I just saw something on the internet where I saw it, where maybe Facebook, where someone had
picture his barn picture of the fox.
Yeah, it's staggering.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't the only one. The state cop that I was good friends with, who was a fur trapper, he also put up 1,000 fox a year.
That's amazing.
And the Leggett's, Ron Leggett,
Bragging like it. Yeah, I've met him.
they're in the same belt area from northern Maryland up to southern Pennsylvania. You can put up those numbers if you know how to do it.
Yeah.
So anyway, my friend Danny's a state cop, and he talked me up to all his buddies. And then I knew another fur trapper. No, he wasn't a fur trapper. He was a friend of my apprentice, and he was a local cop who went on to he quit being a cop when all this cops are bad stuff started to come around, and
Okay.
cops are evil and get rid of defund the police, all that stuff. He quit and he became a NUCO. And he
Wow.
was trained by my apprentice who had gone to Florida and opened his business there. So he went down to Florida, trained with David,
Yeah.
and then came back to Pennsylvania where I live, and he's still doing it today. His
No
name is
kidding.
Chris with a K, Bakari, in Pennsburg, Pennsylvania, and he is AA Animal Control.
All right.
So through all those police contacts, and it's not just the police, it's the veterinarians, the wildlife rehabbers. It was like just a big happy network of constant phone calls, So it was a good time.
So talk a little bit about when you were moving into your business, what were some of the challenges that you had to encounter and how did you overcome them? And because we'd like to give some advice for those who are starting their businesses, or perhaps they're still in the first few years, which those are the most vulnerable times of a person's business.
Well, yeah, the dynamics, as you said, was you get the animal as your introduction to the customer. Whereas today, that's the minimum part of the job.
Yeah.
You're going for the bigger picture. And that's the dynamic that is different now. I think everybody that goes into it now is going into it with a background in metal bending and, all the skills that you need, chimney, roof work, all that stuff, insulation, everything. Demolition, reconstruction. So that's different. When I was doing it, I had my instincts and knowledge from fur trapping and my tools from fur trapping. That's about it when I started. Right. And then when I got more into it, I would see what other people were buying and see what was at the conventions and at the seminars and go from there. And eventually I was, exhibiting at the seminars and selling at the seminars my goods and, the stuff that I had for sale.
Yeah. And what made you make the jump into that?
When I first started, it was supplementing the income.
Okay.
It was, plus it was a good way to get my name out there and sell the book.
Right.
So
well, let's talk about the book. Right. Hold it up to the people. Show them the book.
Yeah. Here's the 4th edition.
4th edition. Hold it up steady.
By Phil Nichols and, 16, was that font 16?
I'd have to look it up what font size it was.
16 for Phil Nichols, and then I think it's 12 for Stephen Van.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the 4th edition.
All right, 4th edition. Hold it up steady for them. You're a bit too many. We're using the blur figure. Hold it up steady for your camera. Put it right up there. There you go. All right.
All right.
Yeah.
The first edition came about when I was, as I said, just getting into wanting to go full-time, knowing I had to go full-time, realizing it was my passion. And it started out basically as I'm writing a business plan, for myself, and this is what I'm going to do. And then it started to snowball, and I know, well, this doesn't really part of my business plan. And then pretty soon I was just committed, and I had an outline in my head that I put on paper. And then it took me about 8 months, 9 months to actually complete it. And the hardest part was putting all the graphics together. I think
Yeah.
you've published your own stuff, haven't you?
Yep, I have.
Well, you know
published
what goes into that.
Yeah, it's definitely easier today than it was back then.
Oh, it was not, yeah. It was a little bit different back then.
That's right.
But
We had
anyway,
hard copy photos that you had to get scanned,
yeah.
and oh yeah, it was a lot more work.
I mean, this is going to be a dinosaur pretty soon, the old hard copy.
It is, yeah. But we have it in digital form too, so it's available as an ebook.
Yeah, that was really the start of me getting my name out there, in the industry and selling more product, selling the book. I sold out 3 editions, so
yeah,
that was.
Yeah, and I think people.
The fourth edition, I didn't want to go through.
Didn't want to go through it, yeah. So I think what the sad thing is that people think that all the information's on it's YouTube or you go to a convention and those are valuable sources, but what people miss, I think, is that there's a coherence to a book that you often may not get with a YouTube video here or a presentation there, and people think that I had one guy, he claimed that, well, information is free, and it's like, well, and I responded back and said, yeah, if you know where it is and how to get it and have access to it and know how to sift it and know how to apply it and know what's good and what's bad, then I guess information's free after all that. And I don't think he got my sarcasm back to him very well, but that's kind of missed. I mean, people, because your book, you talk about some of that business plan a little bit in terms of how you were going to be marketing a little bit, and so where my book was a little less on the business side and more on the technique side, because I just wasn't that business savvy, and so I think this is where when you learn things from different people, you're able to sort of get the full orb of the diamond because different people emphasize different stuff.
Well, what you said earlier at the beginning was I was sort of like the Godfather.
Yeah.
And the guy that was my apprentice, David, he got married in Florida. And I would say 50 of the guests were Nichols.
Wow.
And we had a group picture taken. They sat me in the middle and they called me the Godfather.
So. They called you the Godfather. All right. I did not know that. That must have been quite a picture. I think people don't understand. It's different today, but there was such a small community back in those days. So when we went to a convention, it was almost like a family reunion as much as it was a training event. It was something magical about it. And people were, as the industry grew, people longed for those days, but obviously the industry was becoming far more professionalized, and it was definitely evolving, and people are making a lot more money today than they were back then. Yeah. But there was something magical about it because people were hungry for the information because there was no sources to get it from. You had to talk to people.
Yeah, the book filled that gap a little bit. And it was a magical time that you didn't really know was magical because you were going through it. Mm. And now you look back on it and say, oh man, that was something.
It was. And people it was an amazing time, because especially when you're looking at some of the techniques and you're able to talk to people who invented them. They were the ones who came up with it. And nowadays it's like, oh, that's old news. Well, yeah, but it wasn't when we were there. Right. It was, I remember when I learned how to trap moles, and then of course my state banned the traps. So what else is new?
Well,
but that was a magical time.
When I sold my business, the mole traps went with it. And now we're here in North Carolina. My wife wants me to get rid of the moles in the yard. And I say, go hire somebody. Can't you find somebody around here that does moles? So she went out, she went online and bought 2 mold traps. They were supposed to come 2 days ago, but they're still
Yeah.
not here. Anyway, as far as the future goes, I was doing some futuristic type of research and thinking.
Yeah.
And in 1922, Nikola Tesla made some predictions
Okay.
that mostly he made them for the year 2022, and most of them have come true. The airline, global air
Okay.
business,
Yeah.
the phone, cell phones, information in your hand, that kind of thing. And you know where he got it wrong? He got it wrong. He said by 2022, people will no longer have the need to drink alcohol, and there will be no more wars.
No more wars. Yeah.
So he kind of slipped on the cultural aspect of things, and that's where I think any future has to take into account the cultural aspects. And I was talking to some people the other day, and how's your business doing? What do you see for the future? And well, it's going great. I just can't get help. You should be trying to find a person that's been outside. That's been outside their house. Where are these people going to come from? They came from back then. It came from the ranks of people who grew up in the outdoors.
Right.
And those people aren't getting into they're getting into the business from other areas now. Like look at Kevin Clark at Critter Control. He got in as a marketing person. He knew nothing about trapping, but look what he did with that concept.
Oh, huge. For those who don't know, Kevin Clark started Critter Control, the franchise that now is owned by Rollins or Ork. You may know it as Orkin, but Rollins Corporation.
And he was in it back then, and he was not a trapper. He was not a fur trapper, and he wasn't an outdoorsman.
Yeah.
But
I think that's part of the reason why he was so successful is that he grasped the business side of it.
Yes, immediately.
And that's kind of, and so, and I think that's kind of where, if I had to do it over again, I wish I learned more I wish I charged more, and I wish I put more emphasis on getting some carpentry skills. Would have really helped me a lot. What would you change if you had to go back and do it over again?
I would take on people that had those skills.
Right.
Okay. I tended to go to the local high school and say, hey, you got any wrestler guys that instead of being in the weight room want to tag along with me and get paid? Mm-hmm. So, that kind of summer help. Whereas today I'd probably go and look for a skilled roof guy or chimney guy or insulation person. Somebody to, the different places you can go with this keep growing all the time. It grows by leaps and bounds. Every day I read about some new aspect that I hadn't thought about before.
So where do you see the next evolution of the industry going? You've talked about the challenge of finding labor, and I do think that's a huge problem.
Automation.
How that would be some robot.
Well, you can look at, there's maybe a half a dozen states right now that enacted legislation enabling automated systems for trap checking.
Right. Yes, that's true. Okay. Which helps to a certain degree, but who's going to climb into the attic? Who's going to climb that ladder, right? You got to think.
Oh, here's the other thing. I was thinking there's going to be a residual number of homes that were constructed without giving thought to animal problems, potential animal problems. Mm-hmm. But at some point, architecture is going to take a leap into building a home that's impervious to bugs, mildew, all the things that are,
pest-proof construction.
Service businesses today are going to be built out of the home itself. And there's going to be a residual of older homes. You know, the home that we lived in growing up, is going to get torn down at some point because they were stick construction with asbestos shingles and cheap roofing, and they're going to last throughout history. So they're going to come down and be replaced by something. The real historical buildings will be handled in a different way.
Right.
But I see architecture of the future shaping the way wildlife are directed. And by directed, I mean you have whole swaths of urban wildlife populations that are maybe just being recognized or starting to be addressed by the entities that control that urban situation. And even in the suburbs, I mean, I'm seeing a guy I went to school with, he emailed me and said, "Hey, Phil, I got something really weird. I think there's foxes living under my shed. What should I do?" And of course, I've been dealing with them for 15 years in southeastern Pennsylvania. That was a big issue. And you don't really know they're there until the pups come out and make themselves visible, because the mother is very secretive and very controlling. But at that point, the pups were out and he was wondering what to do. I said, "Well, Ron, you can hire somebody to come out and try to harass them. She probably has another den somewhere." "Oh, no, I don't want to do that. No." So I said, "Well, just, let them go. They're going to stink, when she starts bringing rotten meat home for them to eat, and they start playing with, the hindquarters of a groundhog that aren't fully in the middle of summer. You can imagine and plus they're all going, 9 pups, a mom and a pop, they're all going to the bathroom right there."
Right.
So you've got that odor problem to deal with. And he went through it all. And then once they got to a certain point, he went out and he bought a camera, and that was his full-time job, just photographing this. He was totally enthralled with this family that he considered his family living under his shed. And I'm seeing in the future, there's going to be people, how you get bird feeders and, you look at the bird feeder, take pictures of it. Look at that bird, look at this bird. There's going to be things for all kinds of wildlife. You can go to the Home Depot and buy something to enhance your collection of critters that you consider yours, your groundhogs, your skunks. And maybe the NUCO is going to be involved in going in there and managing the problem that comes out, the odor problem. Maybe he's going to have little, little microscopic drone injectors to give them rabies and distemper and parvo and whatever else. And, it's going to be something else for the future. Wildlife's going to be looked at differently, because the people in X generation or whatever it is today, they don't have a clue,
Right. Well, you really bring up a different frame, and I really like this way you're gaming out the future, because we already have, franchises that are almost no kill franchises now, where they're relying on one-way doors, exclusion, harassment, warming kits for pups and that sort of thing, warming homes. And I really like your idea about the pest-proof construction. I mean, I do think that is very doable if someone could just simply convince the construction industry to start moving, and someone will do that, obviously. And then that will automatically reduce those labor requirements. And I think your idea of wildlife enhancement is a fascinating question.
And that has an application in cities too, where they're converting these urban, row upon row of blight. No people living in these empty, fallen down houses. And they're talking about converting them to farming, back to farming. Urban farmscapes.
Yeah.
And then the vertical urban farming. But anyway.
No, I think you're really onto something there.
I see also the working together with rehabbers. Rehabbers and Nichols are going to be, where you say, well, they're all no kill now. I mean, some states you have to kill, like if there's a rabies epidemic and you got a rabies vector, you got to kill it.
Right.
Even though a lot of them say, well, we don't pay any attention to that. We don't, we do our own, we do what we think is right. We don't think we should kill the animal.
Right.
Okay, well.
I think there'll always be some level of killing, but clearly, like I said, this franchise, they're going to, I believe they're going to follow the law, but their practice is that they're not going to necessarily trap that squirrel. They're going to put a one-way door over that opening and harden the house and then let the squirrel go out. And if it's young season, then they may wait a few weeks for the young to mature a little bit and then put the door on and get them all out there at once. And so even people who hated that idea, 10 years ago, are starting to come around, and they're starting to, well, I'm going to do a one-way door for the skunk, or I'm going to do a one-way door for the ground-dwelling raccoon, and some of them are starting to play with doing it with flying squirrels, and now they're doing, maybe then they get comfortable with doing it with something else. So you can see this evolution occurring, and then you, as you mentioned, the electronic trap checks, remember when we were in business, it was, baits were the big thing. What bait are you using? Right now we have guys doing 2-door traps, the Comstocks, and, Tomahawk has their 2-door trap. And we're, bait is like, well, who's baiting? Why are you baiting when you can just put the trap right over the entrance and you're going to catch them? It doesn't matter what the bait is. There is no bait. So it's the evolution of all this has been kind of dramatic, which is, for an industry that doesn't change that. We're not like technology. We don't change that much. But there have been, you look back from today to what we had in the late 1980s, it's night and day.
Oh, yeah.
And it's, it's amazing.
So you also can spend a lot of money buying things that you don't need.
That's true.
I did a seminar at University of South Carolina, and what they wanted me to do was give a 3-day teaching on nuisance wildlife.
Yeah.
And I set up all my products out in the hall. Okay, everything I had was there. One of each.
Yeah.
At the end of the seminar, and a lot of them were invertebrate pest guys that were wanting to get into vertebrate.
Right.
The guy came up and he said, how much for your stuff? I said, what do you mean? He says, I want to buy everything they have out there. I said, I don't know. I never thought of it. It was like $4,000 of product I had there. He wrote me a check and took it all.
Wow.
Not knowing half of what it was or what it was used for.
Yeah.
But that's, he was on the cutting edge, and God dang it, I'm going to find something.
It's it.
But and you can really have some fun with some of the things that are coming into technology now with AI and robotics, and what are those little tiny things, nanobots.
Nanobots, yeah.
They put them in your bloodstream and they perform some function, the little guy in the submarine. But all this stuff, at some point, you're going to reach what do they call that? The singularity, where AI surpasses human intelligence.
Right.
So what's going to happen then? Is there going to be another 22,000 when everybody's afraid that, something bad's going to happen and nothing happens, or is there something going to happen? It's just on and on.
So what is your advice for the next generation of wildlife control operators? What would you, words of wisdom that you'd want to leave them?
If you're passionate about it, you don't need my words of wisdom. You'll find your own path. Mm-hmm. If you're not up to speed on I came from an outdoors background from a very early age. So I was always in the woods, the streams, the ocean, the fields, with my dog or my shotgun or my traps or my fishing rods. or nothing, just walking around aimlessly, climbing up trees, eating strange berries, just doing things. And I don't see that today. If you want to get outside and really get into nature, that'll put you closer to what you're doing.
Right.
If you love nature, as you should love nature, it's created for us, for our purpose. And it's a sin and a shame not to appreciate it to its fullest extent.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you, Phil.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for coming onto the show, and we're really glad to have you here. Phil Nichols, everyone. He was the founder and owner of PVE Corporation in Pennsylvania, and we're really kind of doing a blast from the past here. This is one of the early founders and early movers within the wildlife control industry back in the 1980s, which for our industry is really kind of almost ground zero. That's kind of when I started from high school. And so that mid 1980s, and so different parts of the country started because state agencies were getting out of doing the work. There was the recession of the 70s, and a lot of governments had shrunk their employees, and so they were just overwhelmed with all these nuisance calls. And then, of course, you had some urban sprawl that occurred in the 80s with the booming 80s and the Reagan years. And then that continued through the 90s with the Clinton administration, where the economy was just going just amazing. And a lot of money was being made, and people were getting McMansions and the whole thing. And so there was this tremendous need. And so here you talk, listening to someone here who was an early founder within that way back in the 1980s in Pennsylvania. So really, we're glad to have you on board, have you on our show here. Thanks everyone. This is Stephen Van Tassel, wildlife control consultant, with another episode of Living the Wildlife, as we've been taking a little bit of time in the past and talking about some of the changes that occurred in our industry. But I would want to just sort of reiterate some things that Mr. Nichols has said here. He talked about where does the future go here, and I think he's come up with something that is quite intriguing. And I just want to reiterate that before we sign off today. He talked about the possibility of pest-proof construction that could have a significant impact on wildlife control down the road. And next one, he's asking, where do we find labor, and where do we have robotic technology that may be involved to try to reduce the labor load, because so many wildlife control operators are having trouble finding labor. And then lastly, he thinks about the issue of wildlife enhancement, so that we're moving from simply responding reactively to probably wildlife control problems to where you're actually managing green space within urban communities and outside of urban communities, and working with wildlife rehabilitators to where you're just sort of managing that environment like a farm. And so maybe it would be at a point where people would be hired, maybe by the government, where they would say, rather than killing that raccoon, they're going to move that raccoon to an area where they have knowledge of that maybe there's a reduction of raccoons in that area, and vice versa. I mean, those people with some biological background and some wildlife background may find that, because we're already seeing private landowners hiring wildlife biologists to manage their estates for various reasons, whether it be for forestry production or hunting opportunities. And so you're kind of getting a little glimpse of the future, and you've heard it here on Living the Wildlife podcast. So again, take a few moments, if you would, drop me a line. If you drop me a line, send to me a wildlife control consultant at gmail.com. Would love to hear your comments if you have ideas for future shows, or if you want to be on the show, definitely reach out to me at wildlife control consultant at gmail.com. And of course, this is Living the Wildlife. Why is it Living the Wildlife? Because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everyone.
God bless.